All right, we're back. Dynasty Trades in 5. I'm Clay.
Hey, it's a happy birthday, Clay.
A day late. I'm Scott. I'm always a day late, but happy birthday, Clay. Belated.
Listen,
Appreciate it, guys.
when you don't have a spouse, you don't remember people's birthdays. That's
Honestly,
just the law.
I wouldn't have remembered my own birthday if I didn't have a spouse. That's for sure. All right, so tonight we're going to talk about startup drafts and specifically trading in startups. You can check out our 2 shows we did on Crush Your Startup Draft as well. But this one, we're going to be focusing specifically on trading in startups. It can be kind of a scary thing. You get an offer sent to you and there's 3 picks on one side, 3 picks on the other, and you don't even know where to start. So you may not trade in startups where, it can be an important thing to do sometimes. So let's get rolling, boys. Scott, you want to start us off?
Obviously, you have to know your settings, your scoring. We talked about kind of basic strategies of just overall dynasty leagues in the past. But I look at it, usually I'm trying to figure out, before the draft starts. I think the most important thing is to try to figure out, based on whatever source you're looking at, whether it's ADP or whether it's tiers, try to figure out kind of where the strong value pockets in the draft are going to be and where the flat pockets and the flat tier of players is going to be. And sometimes it doesn't work that way. Sometimes it's hard to read the room, especially if you're in a league with a lot of people that you've never been in a league with, which is probably what we're going to face when we're doing the listener league. So I think that's the first thing. You have to kind of be able to forecast that, and you're making a big bet, regardless of what it is. Forget about what players you're going to get. Forget about how you're going to build your team. You may have a basic roster construction in mind, but you're still trying to figure out what's the best way to maximize getting there without having to give up all my future picks, to achieve it. Or another thing is I am not a fan of giving up more picks than I have. I'll take a trade where I get 2 or 3 picks for one, but I'm not a fan of, okay, maybe I'm trying to trade up. I'm not against trading back or trading up, but I don't want to do a deal where I'm giving up like 3 of my startup picks, even if it's, a couple picks that are outside the top 5 rounds. I'm not going to be the person that gives up a second, a 7th, and a 9th for a first and move up, 8 spots or something like that. I need to have at least a balanced number of picks. And then I like trying to, just from a really high level strategy, if I'm going to trade back, which there are times to trade back, there's parts of the draft where, hey, if I can trade back just a round and move myself up 4 rounds somewhere else, that's just as good as accumulating a future pick. It's hard to accumulate 2023 picks at this point. We've talked about them so much that, you get in a startup and you're not getting some of those sweetheart trades that you might have gotten a couple years ago where you're getting a free first to move back, 1 round or something like that. That's harder to get now. And I like to cluster picks. So even if I trade back and I lose a couple rounds here, I like to have like a cluster of picks in a certain range. And that's a range that I've tried to forecast what type of player I'm going to get at that point. Like to have like 5 picks in like 2 rounds. Because then I control that tier. Maybe it's the last tier of quarterbacks. Maybe it's the sweet spot where there's a lot of running backs. But I like doing that rather than just sitting every 12 picks or every 14 picks and making my selection. I'd rather move around and try to cluster in a certain range. And if I miss the cluster, then that sucks. I miss out on a huge run of players because I may not have a pick for a couple rounds. Ideally, if you say I have this type of strategy and this is the tier list or the ADP list that I'm looking at, like, let's say you're stuck at the end of the first round. You're probably going to end up not getting one of the top, 7 quarterbacks. So you may want to say, I'm going to build a different way. Maybe I'm going to take, Kyle Pitts, or I'm going to take Jonathan Taylor. I'm going to build around 1 tight end or 1 running back. I want to try to find, okay, I'm going to probably need to address, wide receivers at a certain point. Receivers, the easiest example. It'd be nice to have, 5 picks in a span of, 20 selections, right when everyone is hammering the wide receiver 25 to 45. And if that works out being a good spot with the rest of the startup, then I gained a little intrinsic value there, if that makes sense.
No, I mean, I like that. I don't really care about clustering in a specific round, but yeah, clustering in specific rounds, yes. And those rounds are going to be 1 through 6. And then after that, I don't care. Then I'll just be sniping specific players that are on the board that are falling. And then I'll try to trade up. I did a startup strategy article last year, so I haven't looked at 2021's data, but I'm going to guess it's similar. Basically, most of the top 12 producers at every position are found in the first 6 rounds of the draft. And it's obviously heavily more weighted towards the first and the second. Trading up, I I'm with Scott. I like trading up now. We did the trading back. That's played out, homie. No one does that anymore. Because like Scott said, it's not like the old days. You used to get a first for it. You'd slide back around and someone just give you a first, and you're like, all right. The first round, we've discussed before, we have a strategy of we're just going to draft 2 quarterbacks. So yes, I'm going to sell out to get into the first round. And after that, I'll probably trade back every round outside of the 6th round. But even if I can get a first, there's a good chance that I'll drop back around in any round after I hammer those 2 quarterbacks.
If you're new to startups or you're doing your first startup, how do you even like get a basis for, okay, I'm trading the 208 and I'm going to move back to these are random numbers, move back to the 309, should I get a, big bump up from the 7th to the 5th? How do you even get started? There's calculators that are helpful with startup trading, but how would somebody get started? How would you recommend?
So I've always done the math in my head like this, right? The player that you're trying to move up for in the 3rd round, you're trying to get from me, is way more valuable than the player that I'll be getting in the 6th round or 7th round, right? So you need to accordingly like quadruple the repayment on that. So if I'm going to give you my 2nd and 3rd, I won't like your that's probably a terrible example. Do the example again.
So using an example, if I'm moving from the 2nd to the 3rd, do I need to move from the 7th to the 5th? No. Is that enough?
Nope. Need to move to the 7th to the 4th. Remember the player that you're dropping back from the 2nd round to the 3rd round. The difference between those 2 players is greater than the player from the 7th to the 6th at the high end. So like you're passing up on a high end player. There's a good difference between the 4th and the 6th round. And that's why I'd have to move up to at least the 4th. Like you got to give me at least a couple rounds, like a few rounds. And I'm probably also going to try to get at least a 3rd round rookie pick out of you too. Or I'll just do the 1-for-1 and try to get a first rounder out of you.
Yeah, I mean, then some other basic rules, like Shane's saying, be careful of trading up for specific players. It's easy for us to say because we're in a lot of leagues, but be careful of looking at the board and saying, I have to get this player. Because a lot of times, if you start just chasing players in a startup, it is hard to predict how the board's going to go, especially if you don't know the players that you're playing with. So I think it's always about kind of looking at clusters and tiers and looking at how do I want to formulate my roster. If you know you're going into it, hey, I'm going to knock out 2 quarterbacks, a tight end, and a running back in my first 4 picks. You can kind of be flexible on, okay, if I miss out on the top 7, 8 quarterbacks, then I don't take my quarterback in the 2nd round necessarily, but I know I'm going to probably have to take him in the 3rd or the 4th. And you can count, you can literally go through your tiers and go, okay, I pick in 15 picks and there are 7 running backs that I would draft, and just kind of gauge, do I really need to move up or can I wait? Because if I only have to move up 2 spots, maybe it'll cost me a little bit because that person might know who I'm going after, but it beats trading up 12 spots and paying when you're not even sure what the board's going to look like. So just underestimate how much you can predict what's going to happen. And then also don't get attached to players. It's easier for me to say because I'm in a lot of leagues, but at the same time, like look at how you want to formulate your team and think about from some of your other leagues. If you're in even just one other league, how did it feel last year when you were playing in that league? What could you find on waivers? What was available in trades during the season? What did it seem like people would part with? And then what was it impossible to find? So it's just kind of, you have to be relaxed. You can't chase players. That's when you end up overpaying and you look at your team and you go, if I'm not right on these players, I'm going to get crushed by smart people in my draft.
Yeah, and it's always good to just look back at the very basic settings too. It's like, oh, in this league, I only have to start 1 running back. That kind of stuff comes into play in a startup when you're looking at tiers and thinking about what players you're going to draft where. So in terms of the setup of the startup itself, again, where's your head at in terms of should you have rookies, the actual players in the startup draft themselves, or should you have placeholders? Maybe you have kickers that define a certain pick. Then you have a rookie draft later. What tips do you have on like the startup itself?
I want at least placeholders or the rookie picks themselves in the draft. And then I want to have the rookie draft before the NFL draft. I still want 2 drafts because 2 drafts are fun. And also I can, There's a little strategization going on there when there's picks as opposed to players' names attached to them. So that's my personal preference.
Understand that just because you think that Kenneth Walker is the RB2 and he should go around the 104, that doesn't mean you pick him around where the fourth rookie would go. He's not as valuable as the 104 because the 104 you can delay having to use for at least another, 6 weeks until we would have the rookie draft. And then also understand that if you're even next year, if you're doing a startup at the beginning of the end of the fantasy season, you can take rookie picks and understand those are free roster spots that you don't have to actually convert to players quite yet. So it's inherently the pick is more valuable than the Devy player or the rookie player that hasn't hit the NFL yet because it's undefined. Especially as you get later in the draft, you may draft like a bunch of second and third rounders and you think, oh, I'm going to hit it big. Then you realize, we're going to have to draft these before the NFL draft, and you're going to feel like you're flying blind on a lot of those picks. So just understand when they're going to be used and how they should be valued beforehand and just adjust accordingly, whether it's rookie players, rookie picks before or after the NFL draft.
Okay, if you made it this far, thanks so much. Check out the channel, browse around, hit that subscribe if we earn your business, or at least hit the like. Do us that solid. But we'll see you again soon.